If you've been looking at high power foam paddles like the Loco or Inferno, but want something that swings faster, feels denser, and is a little bit easier to control, the Honolulu J6CR is one that deserves a closer look. On paper, it sits right in that same power category, but on court, it plays very differently. After spending time testing it across drives, counters, drops, dinks, and resets, the J6CR ended up feeling less like a traditional elongated foam paddle and more like a fast, forgiving hybrid with easy access to power and pop when you need it. In this video, I'll break down how it actually plays and how it stacks up against other high-power elongated paddles like the Loco and Inferno, and then talk about who this paddle actually makes sense for. Before getting into the specs, I'm only going to focus on the ones that actually affected how this paddle plays for me. So I'm going to go over the static weight, the swing weight, twist weight, and also the grip size. I won't be diving into the tech on this one since I want to stay focused on playability. But if you want a deeper breakdown of the construction, you can check out other reviewers like John Q. So Honolulu lists the static weight at 8.0 to 8.2 ounces. But my paddle came in closer to 8.4 ounces, which is on the heavier side. That extra weight gives it good stability out of the box, but also limits how much lead tape I can customize with. In terms of swing weight, Honolulu lists a wide range from 112 to 118. Most reviewers were seeing numbers closer to 112. When I was testing out on my Briffidi swing weight twist weight machine, I measured it around 117. That's on the higher end of the range, but considering it has a larger shape face than most paddles, it still swings faster than most elongated shapes, and honestly, it feels closer to a hybrid in hand. So in terms of twist weight, it was reported between 6.2 and 6.8 ounces on Honolulu's website, which is about average for an elongated paddle. It lines up with how stable and forgiving the face feels on off-center contact. Mine personally measured around 6.3, which is still relatively high for an elongated paddle, just toward the lower end of Honolulu's stated range. So the next spec I want to talk about is the grip circumference. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this grip in particular felt thicker than most other grips of other paddles. It was listed at 4.125 inches, but mine measured closer to about 4.3 to 4.4 inches. So if you prefer small handles, this can feel bulky to you and slightly limit the amount of wrist action you can get, especially when trying to do rolls and flicks at the kitchen. Everything else is on screen if you want to pause and check it out. So before we get into the feel, here's a quick audio test of what the J6CR sounds like. So you can hear it feels pretty dense and crisp coming off the face. This is the Loco and Inferno. Here's the bread and butter Loco. So as you can hear there, the J6CR has a higher pitch sound. Doesn't sound as hollow and thonky as the Inferno, which is what it's really known for. Some people prefer the higher pitch sound, some people prefer the more lower pitch thonky sound. I personally like how the Loco and Inferno sounds, but again, it's really up to preference. Now let's move on to the feel. The J6CR has a noticeably denser feel compared to other elongated full foam shapes, such as the Loco, Inferno, and the Selkirk broomstick. Stiffness lands right in the middle, softer than the Loco, but not as plush as the Inferno. Contact feels more solid and crisp rather than springy and plush, with a more responsive and lively feel. Personally, when I first picked up this paddle, I didn't immediately connect with the feel, since I tend to prefer more hollow, stiffer paddles like the Loco. But after spending more time with it, the response started to feel more intuitive, and my touch really dialed in. So if you prefer that hollow, airy feel, this might not be your favorite, but if you enjoy a more dense, crisp response that feels solid and controlled, this paddle will likely suit you well. So moving on, the sweet spot is definitely a standout. It's very large, at times it even feels like a wide body paddle. And the response is very consistent across the entire face. Off-center hits and miss-hits stayed playable, which makes the paddle forgiving in fast exchanges and on resets. Compared to the Inferno, I'd say the sweet spot is about the same size, but it's slightly larger than the Loco. On drives, the J6CR delivers solid power with a very linear, predictable response. Power sits on the upper end of the high power category and comes off the face cleanly without any surprising trampoline effect. I didn't feel like I had to swing extra hard to generate a considerable amount of pace, but it's clearly not a rocket launcher. Like the Inferno, it leans more towards controlled linear power rather than explosive firepower. The Loco, though, still has a slight edge in raw punch, thanks to its fiberglass layer. Spin is good, though not a standout. So dipping the ball on drives feels consistent and reliable, just not elite level. The carbon fiber surface has plenty of grit, but nothing overly aggressive where you could file your fingernails on it. And it sits right in line with paddles like the Inferno and Loco. It's holding up well so far, but it's still too early to know how it will perform over the long term. On drops, it felt fairly predictable, since the pop was relatively easy to control. It did take me a few sessions to really dial on the feel, especially coming from a more hollow paddle like the Loco Inferno, but once I adjusted, I was able to hit drops consistently and confidently. However, the shorter dwell time and fast response on the face made topspin and slice drops harder to execute consistently, since that lower dwell time limits how much shape I can apply to the ball. To prevent myself from popping the ball up too often, I focused more on flatter, push-style drops, which worked well given the predictable and linear pop off the face. Overall, compared to Inferno and Loco, drops felt easier to control and place for a high pop paddle. But if your game depends on heavy topspin to create sharp dip and pressure, this won't generate that same level of bite, and you might find yourself popping the ball up a bit more often on those shots. In fast hand exchanges, the high pop and quick response off the face keep the J6CR competitive with other high-power elongated foam paddles. Counters feel quick and very controllable, letting me win hand battles without much effort. The large sweet spot meant I didn't have to worry about mishits or make perfectly clean contact on every counter. Putaways were still easy, but with slightly less pop than both the Loco and Inferno. Finishing points didn't feel quite as automatic. Flicks were easy to be aggressive with, and I never felt like I was overhitting or losing control of the ball. However, I had to be more careful with lower roll shots, since the shorter dwell time limited how much shape I could apply. Contact feels crisp and solid overall, and the paddle actually swings faster at the net than most elongated shapes, including the Loco Inferno, which helps to stay competitive in those hand exchanges. Dinks felt very controlled and consistent, and I was really able to connect with its crisp, dense feel. The paddle felt intentional throughout, and I was never left surprised by any particular dink. Compared to the Inferno and Loco, on topspin rolls or more aggressive dinks, the medium to high pop allowed me to apply pressure early in the rally. However, the shorter dwell time and quick response off the face made the paddle feel livelier and a bit harder to shape with, which led to more pop-ups, especially when my touch wasn't fully dialed in or when I was forced into a stress position. Even so, it's still a high-performing paddle for dinks and absolutely competes with other high pop options like the Loco Inferno once you adapt. It may just take some time if you're more used to paddles with much longer dwell. With its quick response, you might expect this paddle to struggle on resets, but it actually performs the opposite. Even though the shorter dwell might suggest less pocketing, the pop was controllable enough to prevent balls from popping up too high or floating too long. Compared to the Loco Inferno, I found it easier to naturally absorb pace on resets and quickly dial in my touch to control how much pace I was taking off the ball. Out of all areas of playability, the reset standout is one of its strongest traits, second only to how quick it feels in fast hand exchanges at the kitchen. Now let's talk about the best weight setup in order to really maximize the performance of this paddle. Because of its higher stock weight and swing weight variance, the weight setup matters a bit here more than usual. At around 8.4 ounces, 117 swing weight, and a 6.3 twist weight, the paddle already feels stable and solid, and the sweet spot is already huge. So I didn't feel a strong need to add any additional weight. If you want to preserve the fast hands and quick feel, I'd either leave it stock or add a small amount of weight starting from the throat and moving your way up to the 4 and 8 o'clock positions to add a bit more stability and forgiveness without hurting much maneuverability at the kitchen. Adding weight at the 3 and 9 positions can add more power and plow through, but I'd keep it light, since too much starts to take away from one of the J6CR's biggest strengths, how fast it swings for an elongated shape. Overall, it feels well balanced out of the box, and I feel like overweighting it can do more harm than good. Let's talk about who this paddle is for. If you like the J6 FC Plus and are looking for something with more power and pop, but also with more control and a quicker response, than other high power paddles like the Loco Inferno or Boomstick. Secondly, if you prefer a dense, crisp, and slightly stiff feel that plays clean, predictable, rather than springy and plush. And lastly, if you want an elongated paddle that swings faster than expected, especially in fast hand exchanges at the kitchen. So now let's talk about who this paddle probably isn't for. If you prefer longer dwell and rely heavily on ball shaping to win points, especially on drops and dinks. Secondly, if you already struggle controlling high pop and high power paddles and prefer something in the low power all court category, you're probably going to have trouble controlling this. Lastly, if you have smaller hands, the thicker grip may feel a bit too bulky or really will limit your wrist mobility, especially when you're trying to shape shots. The J6CR has a very clear identity and comfortably sits in the same tier as paddles like the Loco Inferno, but it brings a distinctly different on-court feel and experience. Instead of leaning to raw pop or maximum dwell, it prioritizes speed, predictability, and control within a high power build. It's at its best in fast hand exchanges, counters, and resets, where the quick response and large sweet spot really shine. You give up some dwell and spin shaping compared to softer or more plush foam paddles, but in return you get a paddle that swings faster than expected for an elongated shape and stays extremely playable across the court. If you're already an Honolulu fan and like paddles like the J2NF or J6FC+, the J6CR should feel like a natural step up in power. And if you're choosing between top tier power paddles, this one makes the most sense for players who value speed and control over maximum dwell. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like the video and subscribe for more in-depth paddle reviews and on-court comparisons. If you're interested in picking up the Honolulu J6CR, you can use the code THENEWMAIN for 10% off, which brings the price down to around $175. A great value for a paddle in this tier, in my opinion. It also helps support the channel and allows me to keep bringing you more comprehensive real-world paddle testing. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.